Hey, welcome to another edition of Saturday Night Stories. I am going to be reading you something else tonight. I'm thinking tonight I'm going to do another beer, and I'm going to read from one of my favorite books. So, I've got the beer right here. Today we are cleaning out the beer fridge. We have a fridge in our garage and a mini fridge in our basement, and the mini fridge kind of became the beer fridge. So we have some stuff left over from Christmas. This is Sam Adams White Christmas. It's an ale brewed with spices, and since I haven't done any of my dishes lately, the glass that I'm using today is a horribly bad Corona mug. So let's just get this poured. Alright, so here it is. It's rather yellow. Smells pretty spicy, and isn't bad. Kind of fruity. Alright, well, the book, like I mentioned before, is one of my personal favorites. It's Kafka on the Shore by Haruki Murakami. I probably have read this book 3 or 4 times. I bought the paperback a couple weeks ago because I had only read it on my Kindle before, so I thought, since I love the book so much, I might as well own it. So, since this book doesn't have short stories or anything like that, I thought I would probably maybe read a couple chapters. I don't want to ruin the book for anybody in case you want to read it yourself. But I mean, the book is really great, so I think the first video I ever uploaded was a video of me reading part of this book. It was, in fact. It was like the end of October of last year. And I was reading a part where one of the characters is thinking about gender and partnership and other things like that. So I think maybe I'll read from chapter 11 to chapter 13 or something like that. Maybe I should read the intro though before we get started. This book was copyrighted in 2005. It was originally published in Japan in 2 volumes. And the translation into English happened in 2005. And it's printed by Vintage Books. It's like a splash title cover page. Okay. Kafka on the Shore. The introduction to the book is called The Boy Named Crow. So you're all set for money then, the boy named Crow asks in his typical sluggish voice. The kind of voice, like when you've just woken up and your mouth still feels heavy and dull. But he's just pretending. He's totally awake, as always. I nod. How much? I review the numbers in my head. Close to $3,500 in cash, plus the money I can get from an ATM. I know it's not a lot, but it should be enough for the time being. Not bad, the boy named Crow says. For the time being. I give him another nod. I'm guessing this isn't Christmas money from Santa Claus. Yeah, you're right, I reply. Crow smirks and looks around. I imagine you've started rifling drawers. Am I right? I don't say anything. He knows whose money we're talking about, so there's no need for any long-winded interrogations. He's just giving me a hard time. No matter, Crow says, you really need this money and you're going to get it. Beg, borrow, or steal. It's your father's money, so who cares, right? Get your hands on that much, and you should be able to make it, for the time being. But what's the plan after it's all gone? Money isn't just like mushrooms in a forest. It doesn't just pop up all on its own, you know. You'll need to eat, a place to sleep. One day you're going to run out. I'll think about that when the time comes, I say. When the time comes, Crow repeats, as if weighing these words in his hand. I nod. Like by getting a job or something? Maybe, I say. Crow shakes his head. You know, you've got a lot to learn about the world. Listen, what kind of job could a 15-year-old kid get in some far-off place he's never been to before? You haven't even finished junior high. Who do you think's going to hire you? I blush a little. It doesn't take me much to make me blush. Forget it, he says. You're just getting started and I shouldn't lay all this depressing stuff on you. You've already decided what you're going to do, and all that's left is to set the wheels in motion. I mean, it's your life. You basically gotta go with what you think is right. That's right. When all is said and done, it is my life. I'll tell you one thing, though. You're going to have to get a lot tougher if you want to make it. I'm trying my best, I say. I'm sure you are, Crow says. These last few years, you've gotten a whole lot stronger. I've got to hand it to you. I nod again. But let's face it, you're only 15. Crow goes on. Your life's just begun and there's a ton of things out in the world you've never laid your eyes on. Things you could never imagine. As always, we're sitting beside each other on the old sofa in my father's study. Crow loves the study and all the little objects scattered around there. Now he's toying with a bee-shaped glass paperweight. If my father was at home, you can bet Crow would never go anywhere near it. But I have to get out of here, I tell him. No two ways around it. Yeah, I guess you're right. He places the paperweight back on the table and links his hands behind his head. Not that running away is going to solve anything. I don't want to rain on your parade or anything, but I wouldn't count on escaping this place if I were you. No matter how far you run, distance might not solve anything. The boy named Crow lets out a sigh, then rests a fingertip on each of his closed eyelids and speaks to me from the darkness within. How about we play our game, he says. All right, I say. I close my eyes and quietly take a deep breath. Okay, picture a terrible sandstorm, he says. Get everything else out of your head. I do what he says. Get everything else out of my head. I forget who I am, even. I'm a total blank. Then things start to surface, things that, as we sit here on the old leather sofa in my father's study, both of us can see. Sometimes fate is like a small sandstorm that keeps changing directions, Crow says. Sometimes fate is like a small sandstorm that keeps changing directions. You change directions, but the sandstorm chases you. You turn again, but the storm adjusts. Over and over you play this out like some ominous dance with death just before dawn. Why? Because the storm isn't something that blew in from far away, something that has nothing to do with you. This storm is you, something inside of you. So all you can do is give into it. Step right inside the storm, closing your eyes and plugging up your ears so the sand doesn't get in, and walk through it, step by step. There's no sun there, no moon, no direction, no sense of time. Just fine white sand swirling up into the sky like pulverized bones. That's the kind of sandstorm you need to imagine. And that's exactly what I do. I imagine a white funnel stretching up vertically like a thick rope. My eyes are closed tight, hands cupped over my ears so those fine grains of sand can't blow inside me. The sandstorm draws steadily closer. I can feel the air pressing on my skin. It really is going to swallow me up. The boy named Crow softly rests a hand on my shoulder, and with that, the storm vanishes. From now on, no matter what, you've got to be the world's toughest 15-year-old. That's the only way you're going to survive. And in order to do that, you've got to figure out what it means to be tough. Are you following me? I keep my eyes closed and don't reply. I just want to sink off into sleep like this, his hand on my shoulder. I hear the faint flutter of wings. You're going to be the world's toughest 15-year-old. Crow whispers as I try to fall asleep, like he's carving the words in a deep blue tattoo on my heart. And you really will have to make it through that violent, metaphysical, symbolic storm. No matter how metaphysical or symbolic it might be, make no mistake about it. It will cut through your flesh like 1,000 razor blades. People will bleed there, and you will bleed too. Hot, red blood. You'll catch that blood in your hands, your own blood and the blood of others. And once the storm is over, you won't remember how you made it through, how you managed to survive. You won't even be sure, in fact, whether the storm is really over. But one thing is certain, when you come out of the storm, you won't be the same person who walked in. That's what the storm is all about. On my 15th birthday, I'll run away from home, journey to a far-off town, and live in the corner of a small library. It'd take a week to go into the whole thing, all the details, so I'll just give the main point. On my 15th birthday, I'll run away from home, journey to a far-off town, and live in the corner of a small library. It sounds a little like a fairy tale, but it's no fairy tale, believe me, no matter what sort of spin you put on it. I've decided to flip over to chapter 13 instead of reading 11 and 12, like I said in my introduction. Chapter 13. It's after 12, and I'm eating lunch and gazing at the garden when Oshima comes over to me and sits down next to me. Today, I've pretty much got the library to myself. As always, my lunch is the cheapest box lunch from the little shop at the train station. We talk for a while, and Oshima urges half of his sandwiches on me. I made extra today, just for you, he insists. Don't take it the wrong way, but you look like you're not eating. I'm trying to make my stomach shrink, I explain. On purpose? He asks. I nod. You're doing that to save money. Again, I nod. I can understand that, but at your age, you need to eat and fill up whenever you get the chance. You need your nutrition. The sandwich he's offering me looks delicious. I thank him and start eating. Smoked salmon, watercress, and lettuce on soft white bread. The crust is nicely crunchy, and horseradish and butter complete the sandwich. Did you make this yourself? I ask. No one's about to make it for me, he says. He pours black coffee from his thermos into a mug while I drink milk from a little carton. What are you reading these days? Natsume Sosoki's complete works, I say. I still haven't read some of his novels, so this is a great chance to read them all. Do you like him enough to want to read everything he wrote? Oshima asks. I nod. Steam's rising from the cup in his hands. It's dark and cloudy outside, but at least the rain has stopped. Which of his novels have you read since you've came here? I finished The Miner, and now I'm on Poppies. The Miner, huh? Oshima says, apparently searching out a vague memory of the book. That's the story of the college student from Tokyo who winds up working in a mine, right? And he goes through all these tough times with the other miners and finally returns to the world outside. A sort of medium-length novel, as I recall. I read it a long time ago. The plot isn't what you normally expect from Sosoki, and the style's kind of unpolished, too. Not one of his best. What do you like about it? I try putting into words my impressions of the novel, but I need Crow's help. I need him to show up from wherever he is, spread his wings wide, and search out the right words from me. The main character is from a rich family, I say, but he has an affair that goes sour, and he gets depressed and runs away from home. While he's sort of wandering around, the shady character comes up to him and asks him to work in a mine, and he tags along after him and finds himself working in a Shio mine. He's way down underground, going through all kinds of experiences he would have never imagined. This innocent rich boy finds himself crawling around in the dregs of society. I sip my milk and try to piece together the rest of what I want to say. It takes a while before Crow comes back, but Oshima waits patiently. Those are life and death type experiences he goes through in the mines. Eventually he gets out and goes back to his old life, but nothing in the novel shows he learned anything from these experiences, that his life changed, that he thought deeply about the meaning of life, or started questioning society, or anything. You don't get any sense either that he's matured. You have a strange feeling after you finish the book. It's like you wonder what Soseki was trying to say. It's not like really knowing what he's getting at is the part that stays with you. I can't explain it very well. So the miner is structured very differently from, say, Sosoke's Sanshiro, your typical modern Bildragsman. I nod. I don't know about that, but you might be right. Sanshiro grows up in the story, runs into obstacles, ponders things, overcomes difficulties, right? But the hero of the miner is different. All he does is watch things happen and accepts it all. I mean, occasionally he gives his own opinions, but nothing very deep. Instead, he just broods over his love affair. He comes out of the mine about the same as when he went in. He has no sense that it was something that he decided to do himself, or that he had a choice. He's like totally passive. But I think in real life people are like that. It's not so easy to make choices on your own. Do you see yourself as sort of like the hero of the miner? I shake my head. No, I never thought of it that way. But people need to cling to something, Oshima says. They have to. You're doing the same, even if you don't realize it. It's like Goethe said, everything's a metaphor. I mull this over for a while. Oshima takes a sip of coffee. At any rate, that's an interesting take on the miner, especially since you're both runaways. Makes me want to read it again. I finished the sandwich, crushed the now empty milk carton, and tossed it in the waste can. Oshima, I say, deciding to come right out with it. I'm sort of in a fix, and you're the only one I can ask for advice. He opens both hands wide with a go right ahead gesture. It's a long story, but I don't have anywhere to stay tonight. I've got a sleeping bag, so I don't need a futon or a bed or anything like that. Just a roof over my head. Do you know of any place around here like that? I'm guessing that you're not thinking of a hotel or inn. I shook my head. Money's a factor, but I'm also hoping to not be too conspicuous. To the juvenile section of the police, I bet. Yeah. Oshima thinks it over for a time and says, well, you could stay here. In the library? Sure, it has a roof and a vacant room too that nobody uses at night. But do you think it's all right? Of course, we'll have to make some arrangements first, but it is possible, or not impossible, I should say. I'm sure I can manage it. How so? You like to read good books, to figure things out on your own. You look like you're in good shape physically, and you're an independent kind of guy. You like to read a well-regulated life, and have a lot of willpower. I mean, even the willpower to make your stomach smaller, right? I'll talk with Miss Seiki about you becoming my assistant and staying in the empty room here at the library. You want me to be your assistant? You won't have to do much, Oshima says. Basically help me open and close the place. We hire professionals to do the heavy cleaning or to input things on the computer. Aside from this, there's not a whole lot to do. You can just read whatever you like. Sounds good? Yeah, of course it does. I'm not sure what to say, but I don't think Miss Seiki's going to go for it. I'm only 15 and a runaway, and she doesn't know anything about. But Miss Seiki's, how should I put it? Oshima begins, then uncharacteristically comes to a halt, searching for the right word. A little different. Different? She has a different take on things than most other people. I nod. A different take on things. What does that mean? You mean she's an unusual person? Oshima shakes his head. No, I wouldn't say that. If you're talking about unusual, that would be me. She just isn't bound by conventional ways of doing things. I'm still trying to figure out what the difference between different and unusual is, but decide to hold off on any more questions for the time being. After a pause, Oshima says, "Staying here tonight, though, is a problem, so I'll take you someplace else where you can stay for a couple of days till we get things settled. You don't mind, do you?" "It's a little far away." "No problem," I tell him. "The library closes at 5, Oshima says, "and I have to straighten things up, so we'll leave around 5:30. I'll drive you there in my car. Nobody's staying there now, and not to worry, the place has a roof." "I appreciate it. You can thank me after we get there. It might not be what you're imagining." I go back to the reading room and pick up where I left off in Poppies. I'm not a fast reader. I like to linger over every sentence, enjoying the style. If I don't enjoy the writing, I stop. Just before 5, I finish the novel, put it back on the shelf, then sit back down on the sofa, close my eyes, and think about what happened last night. About Sakura, about her room, what she did to me, all the twists and turns as events take their course. At 5:30, I'm standing outside the library waiting for Oshima. He leads me to the parking lot around back, and we get into his green sports car, a Mazda Miata with the top down. My backpack's too big for the little trunk, so we tie it down tight on the rear rack. "It's a long drive, so we'll stop along the way for dinner," Oshima says. He turns the ignition key and starts up the engine. "Where are we headed?" "Kochi," he replies. "Ever been there?" I shake my head. "How far is it?" "It'll take us about 2.5 hours to get where we're going, toward the south, over the mountains." "You don't mind going so far?" "It's okay. It's a straight shot, and it's still light out, and I've got a full tank of gas." We drive through the twilight city streets, then get on the highway headed west. Oshima changes lanes smoothly, slipping in between other cars, effortlessly shifting gears. Each time the hum of the engine changes slightly. When he shifts gears and floors it, the little car's soon zipping along at over 90. The car's specially tuned, so it's got a lot of pickup. This isn't your ordinary Miata. Do you know much about cars? I shake my head. Cars are definitely not my specialty. Do you enjoy driving? I ask. The doctor made me give up any risky sports, so instead I drive. Compensation. Is something wrong with you? The medical name's kind of long, but it's a type of hemophilia, Oshima says casually. Do you know what that is? I think so, I say. I learned about it in biology class. Once you start bleeding, you can't stop. It's genetic, where the blood doesn't coagulate. That's right. There's all different kinds of hemophilia, and the type I have is pretty rare. It's not such a bad type of the disease, but I have to be careful not to get injured. Once I start bleeding, I have to go to the hospital. Besides, these days there's problems with the blood supply in hospitals. Dying a slow death from AIDS is not an option for me. So I've made some connections in town to supply me with safe blood, just in case. Because of my disease, I don't go on trips, except for regular checkups at the university hospital in Hiroshima. I hardly ever leave town. It's not so bad, though. I never did like traveling or sports all that much anyway. I can't use a kitchen knife, so doing any real cooking's out, which is kind of a shame. Driving's a risky enough sport, I tell him. It's a different kind of risk. Whenever I drive, I try to go as fast as I can. If I'm in an accident driving fast, I won't just wind up getting a cut finger. If you lose a lot of blood, there's no difference between a hemophiliac and anybody else. It evens things out, since your chances of survival are the same. You don't have to worry about things like blood coagulation or anything, and you can die without regrets. I see. Don't worry, Oshima laughs. I'm not going to have an accident. I'm a careful driver and I don't push it. I keep my car in top condition, too. Besides, when I die, I want to die quickly, all by myself. Taking someone else with you, then, isn't an option either. You got it. We pull into a rest stop restaurant for dinner. I have chicken and a salad. He orders the seafood curry and a salad. Just something to fill our stomachs is the best you can say about it. Oshima pays the bill and we climb into the car again. It's already gotten dark. He steps on the accelerator and the tachometer shoots way up. Do you mind if I put on some music? Oshima asks. Of course not, I reply. He pushes the CD's play button and some classical piano music starts. I listen for a while, figuring out the music. It's not Beethoven and not Schumann. Probably someone who came in between. Schubert? I ask. Good guess, he replies. His hands at 10 and 2 on the steering wheel. He glances over at me. Do you like Schubert? Not particularly, I tell him. When I drive, I like to listen to Schubert's piano sonatas with the volume turned up. Do you know why? I have no idea. Because playing Schubert's piano sonatas is one of the hardest things in the world, especially this. The sonata in D major, it's a tough piece to master. Some pianists can play maybe one or two of the movements perfectly, but if you listen to all 4 movements as a unified whole, no one's ever nailed it. A lot of famous pianists have tried to rise to the challenge, but it's like there's always something missing. There's never one where you can say, yeah, he's got it. Do you know why? No, I reply. Because the sonata itself is imperfect. Robert Schumann understood Schubert's sonata as well, and he labeled this one heavenly tedious. If the composition's imperfect, why would so many pianists try to master it? Good question, Oshima says, and pauses as music fills the silence. I have no great explanation for it, but one thing I can say, works that have a certain imperfection to them have an appeal for that very reason, or at least they appeal to certain types of people, just like you're attracted to Sosoke's The Minor. There's something in it that draws you in, more than fully realized novels like Kokoro or Senshiro. You discover something about the work that tugs at your heart, or maybe we should say the work discovers you. Schubert's sonata in D major is sort of the same thing. To get back to the question, I say, why do you listen to Schubert's sonatas, especially when you're driving? If you play Schubert's sonatas, especially this one straight through, it's not art. Like Schumann pointed out, it's too long and too pastoral and technically too simplistic. Play it through the way it is and it's flat and tasteless. Some dusty antique. Which is why every pianist who attempts it adds something of his own, something extra, like this. Hear how he articulates it there, adding rubato, adjusting the pace, modulation, whatever. Otherwise, they can't hold it all together. They have to be careful, though, or all those extra devices destroy the dignity of the piece. Then it's not Schubert's music anymore. Every single pianist who's played this sonata struggles with the same paradox. He listens to the music humming the melody, then continues, "That's why I like to listen to Schubert when I'm driving. Like I said, it's because of all the performances are imperfect. A dense artistic kind of imperfection stimulates your consciousness, keeps you alert. If I'm listening to some utterly perfect performance of an utterly perfect piece while I'm driving, I might want to close my eyes and then die right there and then. But listening to the D major, I can feel the limits of what humans are capable of, that a certain type of perfection can only be realized through a limitless accumulation of the imperfect. And personally, I find that encouraging. Do you know what I'm getting at?" Sort of. I'm sorry, Oshima says. I tend to get carried away on the subject. But there's all kinds of degrees of imperfection, I say. Sure, of course. Comparatively speaking, which performance of the D major sonata do you think's the best? That's a tough one. Oshima gives it some thought. He shifts down, swings over to the passing lane, swiftly passes a huge refrigerated 18-wheeler, shifts up and steers back into our lane. Not to frighten you, but a green Miata is one of the hardest vehicles to spot on the highway at night. It has such a low profile, plus the green tends to blend into the darkness. Truck drivers especially can't see it from up in their cabs. It can be a risky business, particularly in tunnels. Sports cars really should be red, then they'd stand out. That's why most Ferraris are red. But I happen to like green, even if that makes things more dangerous. Green's the color of the forest, red's the color of blood. He glances at his watch and goes back to humming along with the music. Generally, I'd have to say Brendel and Ashkenazadi give the best performances, though they don't do anything for me emotionally. Schubert's music challenges and shatters the ways of the world. That's the essence of romanticism. And Schubert's music is the epitome of the romantic. I keep on listening to the sonata. What do you think? Kind of boring, he asks. Kind of, I admit. You can appreciate Schubert if you train yourself. I was the same when I first listened to him. He bored me silly. It's only natural for someone your age. In time, you'll appreciate it. People soon get tired of things that aren't boring, but not of what is boring. Go figure. For me, I might have the leisure to be bored, but not to grow tired of something. Most people can't distinguish between the two. You said you're an unusual person. Do you mean because of the hemophilia? That's part of it, he says, and gives this devilish sort of smile. There's more to it than that. Schubert's long heavenly sonata finishes, and we don't listen to any more music. We fall silent, each of us filling the silence with our own random thoughts. I gaze vacantly at the passing signs. At a junction, we turn south, and the road heads into the mountains, one long tunnel after another. Oshima concentrates hard, and each time he passes another vehicle. We go by a number of slow-moving trucks on the road, and every time there's this whooshing moan of air, like somebody's soul is being yanked out. Occasionally, I look back to make sure my backpack's still tied down okay. The place we're headed is deep in the mountains, not the most pleasant dwelling in the world, Oshima says. I doubt you'll see anybody else while you're there. There's no radio or TV or phone. Are you sure you don't mind? I don't mind, I reply. You're used to being alone, Oshima comments. I nod. But solitude comes in different varieties. What's waiting for you might be a little unexpected. How so? Oshima pushes up the bridge of his glasses. I can't really say. It might change depending on you. We get off the highway and start down a small regional roadway. Alongside a road near the exit, there's a small town. Oshima stops at a convenience store and buys almost more groceries than we can carry. Vegetables and fruit, crackers and milk and mineral water. Canned goods, bread, pouched packed instant food. Mostly things that don't require much cooking. I start to take out my wallet, but he shakes his head and pays for it all. Back in the sports car, we head down to the road. I'm holding bags that wouldn't fit into the trunk. Once we leave the little town, everything is dark around us. No houses, and only the occasional car. The road is so narrow it's hard for two cars to pass each other. Oshima flips on the high beams and races ahead, braking, accelerating, shifting from second to third, and back. His expression is fixed as he focuses on driving, lips tight, eyes riveted on a point up ahead in the distance. Right hand clutching the top of the wheel, left hand poised for action on the gear shift knob. A sharp bluff appears on our left side. It looks like there's mountain streams below. The curves get sharper and the road more slippery, and a couple of times the rear end of the car spins, but I decide not to worry about it. As far as Oshima is concerned, having an accident here most likely isn't an option. My watch shows a little before 9. I crack open my window and let the cold air rush in. Everything sounds different here. We're in the mountains, heading in deeper. I breathe a sigh of relief when the road finally cuts away from the bluffs and turns into a forest. Trees magically soar above us. Our headlights lick at the trunks, illuminating one after another. We've left the paved road behind, tires squirting out pebbles that ricochet against the bottom of the car. The suspension dances up and down over the road. There is no moon out, no stars. A fine rain occasionally splashes against the windshield. Do you come here a lot? I ask. I used to. Now, with the job and all, I can't come so often. My older brother's a surfer and lives on the shore in Kochi. He runs a surf shop there and makes surfboards. He comes here sometimes. Do you surf? Never tried it, I tell him. If you have the chance, you should have my brother teach you. He's very good, Oshima says. If you meet him, you'll see he's not at all like me. He's big, tan, kind of quiet, not so sociable, and likes beer. And wouldn't know Schubert from Wagner, but we get along really well. We continue down the road through the thick woods and finally turn off. Oshima stops the car and, leaving the engine running, climbs out and unlocks a kind of wire fence and pushes it open. We drive inside and proceed down another windy, bumpy road into a clearing where the road ends. Oshima stops the car, sighs heavily, and brushes his hair back with both hands, then kills the engine and sets the parking brake. The fan still hums, cooling the overheated engine as steam rises from the hood. But with an engine off, a heavy stillness falls over me. I hear a small stream nearby, the faint sound of water. High above us, the wind rustles symbolically. I open the door and step outside. Patches of chill still hang in the air. I have on a yacht jacket over my t-shirt and zip it up to my neck. There's a small building in front of us, a log cabin from the look of it, though it's too dark to see much, just a dark outline floating against the background of the forest. The headlights still on, Oshima slowly approaches the cabin, flashlight in hand, and walks up the porch steps, takes out a key and unlocks the door. He goes inside, strikes a match, and lights a lamp. He then steps out onto the porch, holding the lamp, and announces, "Welcome to my house." It all looks like a drawing in an old storybook. I walk up the steps and go inside. Oshima lights a larger lamp suspended from the ceiling. The cabin consists of a single big boxy room. There's a small bed in the corner, a dining table, and 2 wooden chairs, an old sofa, a hopelessly faded rug, a bunch of old furniture nobody wanted. It looks like just thrown together. There's a cinder block and board shelf crammed full of books, their covers worn like they've been read a lot. There's also an old chest for storing clothes and a simple kitchen with a counter, a small gas stove, a sink, but no running water. Instead, an aluminum pail, I guess, is for water. A pan and kettle on a shelf, plus a frying pan hanging from the wall, and in the middle of the room there's a black wood burning stove. My brother built this cabin almost all by himself. He took the original rough lumberjack hut and remodeled it completely. He's good with his hands. I was still pretty little then and helped out a bit, making sure I didn't get caught or anything. It's pretty primitive. No electricity, no running water, no toilet. The only modern convenience is the propane gas. Oshima pours some mineral water into the kettle and sets it to boil. My grandfather originally owned this mountain. He was a pretty wealthy man in Kochi with a lot of property. He passed away 10 years ago, and my brother and I inherited almost the entire mountain. No other relatives wanted it. It's too far off the beaten track and not worth much. If you're going to maintain it for harvesting trees, you'd have to hire people, and it would cost too much. I open the curtain at the window. All I can see is a wall of total darkness. When I was just about your age, Oshima says, dipping chamomile tea bags into the pot. I used to come here a lot and live on my own. Not see anybody else, not talk to anybody. My brother almost forced me to. Usually with someone who has a disease like mine, you wouldn't do that. It's too dangerous for them to be alone in some sort of isolated spot. But my brother didn't mind. He leans back against the counter waiting for the water to boil. He wasn't trying to discipline me or anything. It's just what he believed I needed. Looking back on it, I can see it was a very good experience, something I did need. I could read a lot, think things over. To tell the truth, after a certain period, I hardly went to school. School and I sort of had a mutual hate relationship going on. I was different from everyone else. Out of the kindness of their hearts, they let me graduate from junior high. But after that, I was all on my own, basically. Just like you. Did I tell you any of this? I shake my head. Is that why you're being so nice to me? That's part of it, he says, then pauses. But that's not the whole reason. Oshima passes me a cup of tea and sips at his own. My nerves are tense after the long drive, and the chamomile is just what I need to calm down. Oshima glances at his watch. I'd better be going, so let me explain everything. There's a nice stream nearby that you can use for water. It's spring-fed, so you can drink it as is. Much better than these bottles of mineral water. There's firewood stacked up and back, so use the stove if you get cold. It gets pretty chilly here. I've even used it a few times in August. You can use the stove for simple cooking. If you need any other tools or anything, check the tool shed out back. And feel free to wear any old clothes of my brother's you find in the dresser. He doesn't care if someone else wears his things. Oshima rests his hands on his hips and gives the cabin a once-over. It's not some romantic getaway, that's for sure. But for simple living, it'll do. One thing I've got to warn you about, don't go very far into the woods. The forest is really dense, and there's not a good path through it. Always keep the cabin in sight. It's easy to get lost if you go any farther, and it's hard to find your way back. I had a terrible experience there once. I was only a couple 100 yards from here, but spent half the day going in circles. You might think Japan's a small country, that there's no chance you could get lost in a forest. But once you get lost in these woods, believe me, you stay lost. I filed that away for future reference. And except for an emergency, I wouldn't come down off the mountain. It's too far to any other houses. Just wait here, and I'll be back in a couple of days to pick you up. You have enough food to see you through. By the way, do you have a cell phone? I do, I tell him, pointing at my backpack. He grins at me. Keep it in your pack. It won't work here either. You're out of range, and of course a radio wouldn't work. You're cut off from the world. You should be able to get a lot of reading done. I suddenly think of a very practical question. If there's no toilet, where should I go to the bathroom? Oshima spreads his both hands wide. The forest is all yours, and it's up to you. Chapter 15. Oshima climbs into his Miata and flips on the headlights. As he steps on the gas, pebbles shoot up, scraping the bottom of the car. He backs up, then turns around to face the road. He raises his hand in farewell, and I do the same. The brake lights are swallowed up in darkness, and the sound of the engine is fading. Then it's completely gone, and the silence of the forest takes over. I go back into the cabin and bolt the door shut from the inside. Like it was lying in wait for me, silence wraps itself all around me tightly once I'm alone. The night air is so cold it's hard to believe it's early summer, but it's too late to light the stove. All I can do is crawl inside my sleeping bag and get some sleep. My mind's a little spacey from lack of sleep, and my muscles ache from bouncing around in the car so long. I turn down the light on the lamp. The room dims as the shadows that fill the corners grow more intense. It's too much trouble to change clothes, so I'd crawl into my sleeping bag with my jeans and yacht jacket on. I close my eyes, but I can't fall asleep. My body's dying for rest while my mind is wide awake. A bird occasionally breaks the silence of the night. Other sounds filter in too. Things I can't identify. Something trampling on fallen leaves. Something heavy wrestling from the branches. The sound of a deep breath. The occasional ominous creak of floorboards on the porch. They sound like they're right near the cabin. An army of invisible creatures that populates the darkness and has me surrounded. And I feel like somebody's watching me. My skin smarts with the sense of eyes boring in on me. My heart beats a hollow thump. Several times from inside the sleeping bag, I open my eyes a slit and peer around the dimly lit room, just to be sure no one else is there. The front door is bolted with that heavy bolt, and the thick curtains at the window are shut tight. So I'm okay, I tell myself. I'm alone in this room, and no one's gazing at me through the windows. But still, I can't shake the feeling that I'm being watched. My throat's parched, and I'm having trouble breathing. I need to drink some water, but if I do, I'll need to take a leak, and that means going outside. I have to hold on till morning. Curled up in my sleeping bag, I give a small shake of my head. Are you kidding me? You're like some scared little kid afraid of the silence in the dark. You're not going to wimp out on me now, are you? You always thought that you were tough, but when it hits the fan, you look like you're about to burst in tears. Look at you. I bet you're going to wet your bed. Ignoring him, I close my eyes tight, zip the bag to just below my nose, and clear my head. I don't open my eyes for anything, not when I hear an owl hooting, not when something lands with a thud on the ground outside, not even when I sense something moving inside the cabin. I'm being tested, I tell myself. Oshima spent a few days alone here too when he was about my age. He must have been scared out of his wits, same as me. That's what he meant by solitude comes in different varieties. Oshima knows exactly how I feel, being here alone at night, because he's gone through the same thing and felt the same emotions. This thought helps me relax a little. I feel I can trace the shadows of the past that linger here and imagine myself as part of it. I take a deep breath and I fall asleep before I know it. It's after 6 a.m. when I wake up. The air is filled with a shower of bird calls. The birds busily flit from branch to branch, calling out to each other in piercing chirps. Their message has none of the deep echo and hidden implications of those the night before. When I pull back the curtains, every bit of the night's darkness has disappeared from around the cabin. Everything sparkles in a newborn golden glow. I light the stove and boil some mineral water, make a cup of chamomile tea, then open a box of crackers and have a few with cheese. After that, I brush my teeth and sink at the sink and wash my face. I pull on a windbreaker over my yacht jacket and go outside. The morning light pours down through the tall trees onto the open space in front of the cabin. Sunlight everywhere, and mist floating like freshly minted souls. The pure, clean air pierces my lungs with each breath. I sit down on a porch step and watch the birds scudding from tree to tree, listening to their calls. Most of them move about in pairs, constantly checking to see where their partner is, screeching out to keep in touch. I follow the sounds of the water and find the stream right away. It's close by. Rocks form a kind of pool where the water flows in, swirling around in a maze of eddies before rushing back out to rejoin the stream. The water is clear and beautiful. I scoop up some to drink. It's cold and delicious. And then hold my hands in the current. Back at the cabin, I cook ham and eggs in the frying pan, make some toast using a metal net, and heat milk in a small pan to wash down my meal. After eating, I haul a chair out to the porch, prop my legs up on the railing, and spend the morning reading. Oshima's bookshelf is crammed full of hundreds of books. Only a few are novels, chiefly classics. Mostly they're books on philosophy, sociology, history, geography, natural sciences, economics, a huge number of subjects, a random selection of fields. Oshima said he'd hardly attended school at all, so this must have been how he got most of his education. I pick out a book on the trial of Adolf Eichmann. I have a vague notion of him as a Nazi war criminal, but no special interest in the guy. The book just happens to catch my eye is all. I start to read and learn how this totally practical lieutenant colonel in the SS, with his metal frame glasses and thinning hair, was, soon after the war started, assigned by Nazi headquarters to design a final solution for the Jews. Extermination, that is. And how he investigated the best ways of actually carrying this out. Apparently, it barely crossed his mind to question the morality of what he was doing. All he cared about was how best, in the shortest period of time and for the lowest possible cost, to dispose of the Jews. And we're talking about 11 million he needed to be eliminated in Europe. Eichmann studied how many Jews could be packed into each railroad car, what percentage would die of natural causes while being transported, the minimal number of people needed to keep this operation going, the cheapest method of disposing of dead bodies, burning or burying or dissolving them. Seated at his desk, Eichmann pored over all these numbers. Once he put it into operation, everything went pretty much according as planned. By the end of the war, some 6 million Jews had been disposed of. Strangely, the guy never felt any remorse. Sitting in court in Tel Aviv, Behind bulletproof glass, Eichmann looked like he couldn't for the life of him figure out why he was being tried or why the eyes of the world were upon him. He was just a technician, he insisted, who found the most efficient solution to the problem assigned to him. Wasn't he doing just what any good bureaucrat would do? So why was he being singled out and accused? Sitting in the quiet woods with birds chirping all around me, I read the story of this practical guy. In the back of the book, there was a penciled note that Oshima had written. His handwriting's pretty easy to spot. And he writes, "It's all a question of imagination. Our responsibility begins with the power to imagine. It's just like Yeats said, in dreams begin responsibilities. Flip this around and you could say that where there's no power to imagine, no responsibility can arise, just like we see with Eichmann." I try to picture Oshima sitting in this chair, his usual nicely sharpened pencil in hand, looking back over this book and writing down his impressions. In dreams begin responsibilities. The word hits home. I shut the book, lay it on my lap, and think about my own responsibility. I can't help it. My white t-shirt was soaked in fresh blood. I washed the blood away with these hands. So much blood in the sink turned red. I imagine I'll be held responsible for all that blood. I try to picture myself being tried in a court, my accusers doggedly trying to pin the blame on me, angrily pointing fingers and glaring at me. I insist that you can't be held responsible for something you can't remember. I don't have any idea what really took place, I tell them, but they counter with this. It doesn't matter whose dream it started out as. You have the same dream. You're responsible for what happens in the dream. That dream crept inside you right down the dark corridor of your soul. Just like Adolf Eichmann caught up, whether he liked it or not, in the twisted dreams of a man named Hitler. I put the book down and stand up and stretch. I've been reading for a long time. I need to get up and move around a little. I take the aluminum pail by the sink and go to the stream to fill it. Next, I take an armload of firewood from the shed in the back and set it by the stove. In a corner of the porch, there's a faded nylon rope for hanging out laundry. I pull out my damp clothes from my backpack, smooth out all the wrinkles, and hang them up to dry. I take everything else out of the pack and lay it on the bed, and then sit down at the desk and fill in my diary for the last couple of days. I use a pen with a fine tip and write down in small letters everything that's happened to me. I don't know how long I'll remember the details, so I better get them down as fast as I can. I search my memory, how I lost consciousness and came to in the woods behind a shrine, the darkness in my blood-soaked t-shirt, phoning Sakura, spending the night at her place, how we talked, how she did that to me. She said, "I don't get it. You didn't have to tell me that. Why don't you just go ahead and imagine what you want? You don't need my permission. How can I know what's in your head?" But she got it wrong. What I imagine is perhaps very important for the rest of the entire world. That afternoon, I decide to go into the woods. Oshima said that going into the forest too far is dangerous. Always keep the cabin in sight, he warned me. But I'll probably be here for a few days, and I should know something about this massive wall of a forest that surrounds me. Better to know a little, I figure, than nothing at all. Empty-handed, I say goodbye to the sunny lot and step into the gloomy sea of trees. There's a kind of rough path trod down through the forest, mostly following the lay of the land, but improved here and there with a few flat rocks laid down like stepping stones. Places prone to erosion have been neatly buttressed with wooden planks, so that even if weeds grow over it, you can still follow the path. Maybe Oshima's brother worked on the path little by little each time he stayed here. I followed into the woods, climbing uphill at first, and then it goes down and skirts around a high boulder before climbing up again. Mostly, it's overall uphill, but not a very tough climb. The trees lined both sides with dull-colored trunks, thick branches growing out every which way, dense leaves overhead. The ground is covered with undergrowth and ferns that have managed to soak up as much of the faint light as they can. In places where the sun doesn't reach, moss has silently covered the rocks. Like someone excitingly related a story only to find the words petering out. The path gets narrower the farther I go, the undergrowth taking over. Over a certain point, it's hard to tell if it's really a path or something that just vaguely resembles one. Eventually, it's completely swallowed up in a sea of ferns. Maybe the path does continue up ahead, but I decide to save that exploration for the next time. I don't have the right kind of clothes and haven't really prepared for that. I come to a halt and turn around, and suddenly nothing looks familiar. There's nothing I can cling to. A tangle of tree trunks ominously blocks the view. It's dim, the air filled with a stagnant green, and not a bird to be heard. I'm suddenly covered in goosebumps, but there's nothing to worry about, I tell myself. The path is right over there. As long as I don't lose sight of that, I'll be able to return to the light. Eyes glued to the ground, I carefully retrace my steps, and after much longer than it took me to get here, finally arrive back in front of the cabin. The lot is filled with bright, early summer sunlight, and the clear calls of the bird echoes as they search for food. Everything's exactly the same as I left it, or at least I think it is. The chair I was sitting on is still on the porch. The book I was reading is face down like I left it. Now I know exactly how dangerous the forest can be, and I hope I never forget it. Just like Crow said, the world's filled with things I don't know about. All the plants and trees there, for instance. I'd never imagined that trees could be so weird and unearthly. I mean, the only plants I've ever really seen or touched till now are the city kind, neatly trimmed and cared for trees and bushes. But the ones here, the ones living here, are totally different. They have a physical power, their breath grazing any humans who might chance by, their gaze zeroing in on the intruder like they've spotted their prey, like they have some dark prehistoric magical powers. Like deep-sea creatures rule the ocean depths. In the forest, trees reign supreme. If it wanted to, the forest could reject me or swallow me up whole. A healthy amount of fear and respect might be a good idea. I go back to the cabin, take my compass out of my backpack, and check that the needle's still showing north. It might come in handy sometime, so I slip it in my pocket. I go sit on the porch, gaze at the woods, and listen to Cream and Duke Ellington at my Walkman. Songs are recorded off a library's collection of CDs. I play Crossroads a couple times. Music helps me calm down, but I can't listen for very long. There's no electricity here and no way to recharge the batteries. So once my extra batteries are dead, the music's over for good. I work out a little before dinner. Push-ups, sit-ups, squats, handstands, different kinds of stretching exercises. A routine that keeps you in shape without any machines or equipment. Kind of boring, I'll admit, but you get a decent workout. A trainer at the gym taught me the routine. Prisoners in solitary confinement like this best, he explains, calling it the world's loneliest workout routine. I focus on what I'm doing and go through a couple of sets, my shirt getting sweaty in the process. After a simple dinner, I go out on the porch and gaze up at the stars twinkling above. The random scattering of millions of stars. Even in a planetarium, you wouldn't find this many. Some of them look really big and distinct, like if you reached out your hand intently, you could touch them. The whole thing is breathtaking. Not just beautiful, though. The stars are like the trees in the forest. They're alive and breathing, and they're watching me. What I've done up till now, what I'm going to do, they know it all. Nothing gets past their watchful eyes. As I sit there under the shining night sky, again a violent fear takes hold of me. My heart's pounding a mile a minute, and I can barely breathe. All these millions of stars looking down on me, and I've never given them more than a passing thought before. Not just stars. How many other things haven't I noticed in the world? Things I know nothing about. Suddenly I feel helpless and completely powerless, and I know I'll never outrun that awful feeling. Back inside the cabin, I carefully arrange some firewood in the stove, ball up a few sheets of an old newspaper, light it, and make sure the wood catches fire. In grade school, I was sent to a camp and learned how to build a fire. I hated camp. But at least one good thing came out of it, I suppose. I opened the damper to let the smoke out. It doesn't go well at first, but when a piece of kindling catches the fire, it spreads to the other sticks. I shut the door of the stove and scrape a chair in front of it, set a lamp nearby, and pick up where I'd left off in the book. Once the fire's built up a bit, I set a kettle of water on top to boil, and after a while the kettle burbles pleasantly. Back to Eichmann. Of course, his project didn't go according to plan. Conditions at various sites slowed things down. When this happened, he acted like a human being, at least a little. He got angry, is what I'm saying. He grew incensed at uncertain elements that threw his elegant solution into disarray. Trains ran late. Bureaucratic red tape held things up. People in charge were replaced, and relations with their successors didn't go well. After the collapse of the Russian front, concentration camp guards were sent there to fight. There were heavy snowfalls and power outages, not enough poison gas to go around. Rail lines were bombed. Eichmann hated the war itself. That element of uncertainty always screwed up his plans. At his trial, he described all of this, no emotion showing on his face. His recall was amazing. His life was entirely made up of these details. At 10, I put the book down, brushed my teeth, and washed my face. The fire bathes the room in an orange glow, and the pleasant warmth calms my tension and fears. I smuggle into my sleeping bag and dressed only in a t-shirt and my boxers. Compared to last night, I'm able to shut my eyes easily. Thoughts of Sakura cross my mind. I was thinking of how nice it'd be if I were your real sister. She'd said, "None of that tonight. I've got to sleep." A log topples over in the stove and an owl hoots outside, and I topple down into an indistinct dream. The next day's the same. Birds wake me up a little before 6. I boil some water, make a cup of tea, and have breakfast. Read on the porch, listen to music, go fill up the water pail at the stream, and walk down the path into the woods. This time, carrying my compass, glancing at it every once in a while to get a general idea of where the cabin is. I found a hatchet in the shed and used it to chop a simple hatch mark on the trees. I clear out some of the underbrush to make the path easier to follow. Just like yesterday, the forest is dark and deep, the towering trees forming a thick wall on both sides. Something of the forest is hiding in there, in the darkness between the trees, like some 3D painting of an animal watching my every move. But the fear that made me shudder isn't there anymore. I've made my own rules, and by following them I won't get lost. At least, I hope not. I come to the place where I stopped yesterday and forge on, stepping into the sea of ferns. After a while the path reemerges, and I'm surrounded by a wall of trees, on whose trunks I hack out some markings as I go. Somewhere in the branches above me is a huge bird, and it flaps its wings, but looking up, I can't spot it. My mouth is dry. I walk on for a while and reach at some sort of clearing. Surrounded by tall trees, it looks like the bottom of a gigantic well. Sunlight shoots down through the back branches like a spotlight, illuminating the ground at my feet. The place feels special somehow. I sit down in the sunlight and let the faint warmth wash over me, taking out a chocolate bar from my pocket and enjoying the sweet taste. Realizing again how important sunlight is to human beings, I appreciate each second of that precious light. The intense loneliness and helplessness I felt under those millions of stars has vanished, but as time passes, the sun's angle shifts and the light disappears. I stand up and retrace the path back to the cabin. In the afternoon, dark clouds suddenly color the sky a mysterious shade, and it starts raining hard, pounding the roof and windows of the cabin. I strip naked and run outside, washing my face with soap and scrubbing myself all over. It feels wonderful. In my joy, I shut my eyes and shout out meaningless words as the large raindrops strike me on the eyes, the cheeks, the eyelids, the chest, side, penis, legs, and butt. The stinging pain like a religious initiation or something. Along with the pain, there's a feeling of closeness, like for once in my life, the world's treating me fairly. I feel elated, as if all of a sudden I've been set free. I face the sky, hands held wide apart, open my mouth wide and gulp down the falling rain. Back inside, the hut. I dry off with a towel, sit down on the bed, and look at my penis. A light-colored, healthy, youthful penis. The head still stings a little from the rain. For a while I stare at this strange organ. Most of the time it has a mind of its own and contemplates thoughts not shared by my brain. I wonder if Oshima, when he was this age, stayed here and struggled with sexual desire. He must have, but I can't picture him taking care of business on his own. He's too detached and too cool for that. I was different from everyone else, he said. I don't know what that means, but I'm sure he wasn't just spouting something off the top of his head. He didn't mean it to be mysterious and coy either. I consider jerking off, but think better of it. Being pummeled by the rain so hard makes me feel strangely purified, and I want to hold on to that sensation for a little longer. I pull on some boxers, take a few deep breaths, and start doing squats. 100 squats later, I do 100 sit-ups. I focus on one muscle group at a time. Once my routine's done, my mind is clear. The rain has stopped. The sun's starting to shine through the breaks in the clouds, and the birds have started chirping again. But that calm won't last long, you know. It's like beasts that never tire, tracking you everywhere you go. They come out at you in the forest. They're tough and relentless, merciless, untiring, and they never give up. You might control yourself now and not masturbate, but at the end they'll get you as a wet dream, something you might think about, like raping your sister or your mother. It's not something you can control. It's a power beyond you, and all you can do is accept it. You're afraid of imagination, and even more afraid of dreams. Afraid of the responsibility that begins in dreams, but you have to sleep, and dreams are part of sleep. When you're awake, you can suppress imagination, but you can't suppress dreams. I lie down and listen to Prince on my headphones, concentrating on this strangely unceasing music. The batteries run out in the middle of Little Red Corvette, the music disappearing like it's been swallowed up by quicksand. I yank off my headphones and listen. Silence, I discover, is something you can actually hear. So that's it for this edition of Saturday Night Stories. I hope you enjoyed that reading. It is one of my favorite books, and you can probably tell why. It's because it has a lot of natural themes, and in addition to natural themes, it has a lot of metaphors and symbolism. And I mean, they're talking about imperfect symphonies, and they're talking about silence being something that you can actually hear, and I mean, they're just all parallels to real things, which I love. I used to be really obsessed with this book, and I went on a vacation one time. We have a house up in the north part of Wisconsin, and it's in the middle of a 40-acre forest, and there's a lake, and there's a couple houses around, but by and far it is a summer destination. And I was there one time in early spring. I was having it was like a drinking night with my brother and one of my cousins, and I had been obsessed with the themes in this book, and one of the themes is like silence and darkness. I didn't really get to read any of the darkness parts of this book, but I decided one night that I was just going to go and hide in the forest while everyone else was doing whatever they were doing, and it didn't take long for someone to find me, but it was just, I don't really know what I was thinking, but yeah, I mean, this book has been a big part of my my development as a person, and I just love it so much. So I possibly will read more from this book in the future. We'll see. If you have any ideas for future readings, please feel free to sound off in the comments. Right now I'm probably a couple weeks out from fulfilling requests still, but I definitely have a list going of possible subjects to read about. So if you have an idea, if you want to hear something, let me know. Also, if you have a beer to suggest for these sessions, also shoot out a suggestion. I'd love to hear it. So I hope you enjoyed, and I'll catch you next time. Alright? Bye.